Hey everyone, welcome to Gender Decoded. I'm your host. Thanks for pressing play and spending the next half hour with me. Think of this as your weekly coffee chat, where we peel back the statistics, dig into the social forces behind them, and surface stories that numbers alone can't tell. Today we're diving into the pills that changed psychiatry, reshaped primary care, and as you'll hear, trace a surprisingly gendered route through British society, antidepressants. For the next 30-plus minutes, we're going to explore three big questions. First, how many people in England are taking antidepressants right now, and who are they? Second, why does that number look so different when we split it by age and by gender? And third, what does all of this reveal about stress, healthcare access, and the shape of everyday life in 2025? We'll walk through the latest NHS figures, unwrap the methodology behind them, tour the data age band by age band, share a few jaw-dropping facts, and then pause at the end to ask, where do we go from here? My promise is that you'll leave with a clearer sense of the forces pushing millions onto long-term medication, and maybe an idea or two about alternatives.
Welcome to Gender Decoded, where numbers align, seeing the stories that data defines. Breaking the barriers, truth untold, insights in gender, the data force.
Let's set the stage with a little history, 1 minute. Quick and tight. Back in the late 1980s, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, hit the market. They arrived with bold claims of fewer side effects than earlier antidepressants and a simplicity that fit neatly into 10-minute GP consultations. At the turn of the millennium, England still dispensed fewer than 20 million antidepressant items a year. Jump forward to 2024, and that annual number is poised to top 90 million. The COVID pandemic poured rocket fuel on an already rising trend, but the curve was pointing upward long before lockdowns, driven by widening diagnostic criteria, overstretched psychological services, and, frankly, a culture growing more comfortable, sometimes too comfortable, medicalizing sadness. Now, the data we're working with. The Sunday Times filed a Freedom of Information request with NHS Business Services Authority. The BSA maintains England's prescription payment system, meaning it can tally exactly how many scripts pass through pharmacy tills. The FOI returned anonymized, aggregated counts. How many people in each 5-year age bracket received at least one antidepressant prescription during the third quarter of the 2024-25 fiscal year? And how many of those people have held a repeat prescription for more than 5 straight years? Researchers then calculated percentages by dividing those patient counts by mid-year population estimates from the Office for National Statistics. Here's why that's important. We're not talking about one-off prescriptions or box-ticking GPs. To show up in this data, you needed a live script in the 3-month window, and you needed to pick it up from a pharmacy. No guessing, no self-reporting, hard dispensing records. The margin of error is almost purely demographic. If the population denominator is off by a few thousand migrants or uncounted centenarians, the percentages shift a tenth of a point either way. It's about as solid as administrative data gets. The headline numbers: 12% of England's entire population is on an antidepressant. Slice that by gender, and you get 9% of men and 16% of women. Right there, we've already learned 2 things. 1, usage is common, roughly 1 in 8 people. 2, women are almost twice as likely to be medicated. Keep that ratio in mind, because it never really disappears as we climb the age ladder. Let's walk through the chart together. Together, imagine a horizontal bar graph split down the middle. Left side, navy bars for men. Right side, orange bars for women. Each row is a 5-year age band. Under 15, virtually 0. Clinicians are cautious with children. Guidelines restrict use, and any scripts need specialist sign-off. Teenagers 15 to 19, men at 2%, women at 5%. 3 teenagers in a typical physics classroom of 30 are on an antidepressant, and they're overwhelmingly girls. Early 20s, male 5%, female 12%. University stress, entry-level job insecurity, relationship churn, all fertile ground for mood disorders. Late 20s, early 30s. Those bars inch up men 7 to 8%, women 13 to 15. Pay attention. That gender gap is widening exactly when many people are forming long-term partnerships, juggling career pressure, and, for some women, navigating the emotional roller coaster of fertility decisions. Midlife, 40 to 59, the graph turns steep. Men hit low teens. Women burst past 19, 21, 23, even 25% in the 55 to 59 slot. Yes, 1 in 4 women in that band, 60 plus, the bars plateau. Men hold around 14%. Women hover in the mid-20s. Curiously, once they reach 90, men actually close the gap, a bit 13% versus 22, but sample sizes get tiny up there. Now overlay a second set of lines, duration of use. Remember that FOI kicker, 7% of England have taken antidepressants for 5 years or more. But look closer. It's 9% of women versus just 4% of men. Among women over 50, the long-term rate is 15%, triple the rate for men the same age. We're not talking about short bursts to get through a rough winter. This is half a decade of continuous medication. Let's pause for some mind-stretching facts, quick-fire style. The number of long-term antidepressant users has almost doubled in just 3 years, from about 2 million people in 2022 to nearly 4 million today. Teenage girls receive roughly 2/3 of all under 18 antidepressant prescriptions, even though they make up only half of the cohort. Annual antidepressant dispensing now costs the NHS more than £220 million, yet funding for talk therapy has barely budged since 2018. England's prescription volume per capita outstrips many comparable nations, including Germany and the Netherlands, despite similar or lower prevalence of diagnosed depression in surveys. Eye-opening? Absolutely. But let's not leap straight to blame. We need to understand why. So why the steady climb and why the gender split? Let's tackle them one layer at a time. Help-seeking behavior. Multiple studies show women are more likely than men to report psychological distress to a GP. Socialization plays a role. So do historically gendered expectations about stoicism. If you don't present, you don't get a prescription. Life course stressors. Midlife for women often overlaps with the so-called sandwich generation burden raising teens while caring for aging parents, all whilst trying to stay afloat at work. Add perimenopause and hormonal fluctuations, and you've got a powder keg for mood disturbance. Clinical practice shortcuts. GPs have 10 minutes. A pack of sertraline is cheaper and quicker to prescribe than a referral to an improving access to psychological therapies. IAPT waiting list that could stretch past 12 weeks. Once started, scripts are easy to renew electronically. Diagnostic creep. SSRIs aren't only for major depressive disorder, they're used for generalized anxiety, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder, even chronic pain. Broader indications inflate the numbers. Withdrawal inertia. Antidepressant discontinuation can cause brain zaps, nausea, insomnia, a cocktail unpleasant enough to deter tapering. Without structured prescribing services, many patients decide, or are advised, to just stay on. Men share some of those pressures, but appear buffered by both lower help-seeking and, according to some research, doctors' greater reluctance to code men's emotional distress as clinical depression. Interestingly, when men do present, they're statistically more likely to be offered lifestyle advice or even referred for alcohol screening before medication, whereas women are flicked to the SSRI script pad sooner. Let's dig into the age curve in more depth. Under 15, use remains vanishingly small, but the teenage rise is non-trivial. Social media toxicity, academic pressure, and post-lockdown anxiety are obvious suspects. Less visible is a structural issue. Child and adolescent mental health services, CAMHS, are severely overloaded, forcing GPs to medicate as a stopgap. In early adulthood, the curve steepens. Job insecurity and unaffordable housing aren't purely economic storylines, they translate directly into mental health load. 2/3 of renters under 30 report anxiety about paying the next bill. Pharmaceutical relief becomes a default option when waitlists for CBT approach half a year. Hit 40 and physical health problems creep in, nudging some prescriptions. But the dramatic gender divergence happens between 45 and 59. Here menopause matters. Guidelines advise hormone therapy as first line for menopausal mood, yet prescription audit data show SSRIs and SNRIs being used instead in about 40% of cases. Factor in the caregiving crunch, aging parents, grown children, boomeranging home, and you have a plausible recipe for that 20+% prevalence among women. After 60, we might expect rates to skyrocket with bereavement and isolation. They don't. Why? A mix of competing risks, such as polypharmacy concerns and GP caution over falls, plus possibly a survivor effect, those heavily medicated earlier either stabilize or are already in the cohort. On to duration. The rule of thumb used to be 6 to 9 months post-remission before discussing taper. Now, repeat dispensing protocols effectively automate renewals. It's not unusual for a patient to sail through annual reviews with a single "still okay on those" tick box. No wonder 5-year use has doubled. Research shows half of long-term users have never attempted a dose reduction. Let's zoom out for a systems view 5 drivers pushing the trend upward. Primary care, time pressure. 10-minute slots leave little room for nuanced mental state exams or safety netting around suicidal ideation. A prescription is tangible, quick, and defensible. Therapy bottlenecks. IAPT sets. IAPT is world-leading in scale, yet still can't meet demand. 1 in 4 patients waits over 3 months for their first session. Pharmaceutical marketing legacy. Although direct-to-consumer ads are banned, 2 decades of professional education and guideline lobbying normalize SSRIs as harmless long-term. Societal despair. Wages stagnate. Housing is precarious. Community structures thin. Medication fills the gap where social policy has stepped back. Withdrawal avoidance. Patients fear relapse. Clinicians fear patient distress. Both underestimate the possibility of gradual taper with support. Notice how none of these are individual failings. They're structural. That makes the gender gradient even more interesting because it suggests structure interacts with specific female life course challenges. The numbers aren't a verdict on women's resilience. They're a mirror showing where healthcare design, social care, and workplace policy intersect with biology. Before we wrap, let me drop 3 final stats to keep rattling around in your brain. If you lined up every woman in England aged 50 and handed them a random pill bottle, you'd have almost a 1 in 4 chance of that bottle being an antidepressant. Long-term adherence, those on meds 5 years or more, has doubled faster than the underlying depression diagnosis rate, meaning persistence, not incidence, is driving the recent surge. Among teenagers, the prescribing gap is widening year on year. In 2017, girls were 1.4 times more likely than boys to receive an SSRI. By 2024, that ratio is nearer 2 to 1. Okay, let's land this plane. Today we traced the antidepressant rise from its late 80s origins through the 2024 snapshots. We saw that 12% of England is medicated, but the average hides a yawning gender divide: 16% of women versus 9% of men. We unpacked the age curve, spotlighted the midlife female spike, and explored how help-seeking, clinical shortcuts, menopause, and caregiving combine to create that pattern. We looked at duration, learning that nearly 4 million people have been on antidepressants for over 5 years, and most are women. Finally, we recognize that these pills, life-saving for many, also function as a social barometer. High usage doesn't merely tell us people are sad. It tells us how our systems respond when they are. Where to next? Better menopause care, expanded psychological services, routine prescribing clinics, and broader social policies that lighten the load on the sandwich generation. None are quick fixes, but the data make one truth unmistakable. If we leave medication as the primary coping tool, the bars on that chart will only grow longer. Thanks for listening to Gender Decoded. I'm glad you spent this half hour dissecting the numbers with me. If you found value in today's episode, share it with a friend, leave a review, or tell me what other gender-inflected data stories you'd like decoded. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep questioning the numbers.